Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about something that's been troubling me a great deal, and I hope we can have a conversation about it. What's been troubling me? Censorship. Why we have it and why we don't need it. I'll have more on that in just a moment. Our founding fathers were pretty smart because they took a page right out of the King's playbook and looked at what the King did in merry old England to make sure that people were subservient to the crown. Specifically, what the King did is if you drafted a pamphlet and distributed it that said the King was a jerk, you were probably going to be locked up and thrown in jail. And in some cases, particularly with regard to Henry VIII, some of the punishments that came with insulting the king were pretty epic, and they're the reason we have the Eighth Amendment, protection against cruel and unusual punishment. Imagine being suspended naked and dropped slowly into a vat of boiling oil. Yeah, that happened. So, our founding fathers looked at that and they said, we don't want that in the United States. So we want some protections crafted into the Constitution that will protect us from government overreach and specifically from censorship. So here's the problem with censorship. It's really a question of who draws the line. Back in the 1970s, a guy by the name of Robert J. Ringer wrote a book called Winning Through Intimidation. And it was such a hit that he went on to write another book called Looking Out for Number One. If you can find those in a library or maybe on Kindle, I would urge you to read them. Not because they have particularly prescient views of how to, intimidate other people, because they don't. What they have are some observations about life that I think are very important. And one of those is that whenever you have somebody who is in a position of power, they draw the lines. They say this is how far you can go and no further. So in your job, when you work for XYZ Corporation, XYZ Corporation can say, you can't have a Facebook page. And as a result, if you want to keep your job, you can't have a Facebook page. In that case, it isn't the government putting a prohibition on your right to free expression. It is your desire to keep working. And the courts have routinely upheld where an employer has said, look, you can't have this particular right of free expression and work here. But there is a fundamental difference between that situation where your employer says you can't do something, and someone that you have no employment relationship with telling you, no, what you're saying is misinformation. The last thing in the world I would have thought moldy corn would have been good for was keeping infections at bay. But indeed, penicillin, the wonder drug of the 1940s and 50s, arose from corn mold. Sometimes things are not as black and white as they seem. And it was a stroke of brilliance to use that corn mold to produce penicillin, and it has saved millions of lives worldwide. Whether suppression of speech and ideas occurs from the government, as it did in the King's time, or big tech, as it does now, or from the church, as it did in Galileo's time. It almost always works against innovation and progress. The problem is that the people who draw the line are not benign actors. In other words, they may or may not be protecting their own pecuniary interests in the lines that they draw. And because they have these pecuniary interests, the government is able to manipulate those big tech actors into doing things they might not otherwise do. Let me give you an example. The Federal Communications Commission, generally speaking, has some control over the internet. And in addition to that, Congress has passed this act which gives a limit to the liability of these big tech platforms for the information that they distribute. They can't be held liable if you find the plans for an AK-47 online and build one and shoot 10 people. They can't be held liable for that. And in truth, they wouldn't be held liable for that anyway, because it isn't the plans that killed somebody, it's the nutcase that built the gun and shot the people, right? That's how we think in this country. But unfortunately, any tool that can be used can be abused. And in this situation, it's certainly the case where censorship can be abused. So, the government doesn't want what it terms misinformation about a particular thing. Maybe whether or not corn mold can treat infection. And so what it says to big tech is, look, we think this is misinformation. Now, we're not telling you what to do, but we do have this Section 230, and we could certainly amend that to hold you accountable if you spread misinformation. And so, being the good lapdogs that they are, and being corporate people who want to keep shareholders happy and continue to make money, what they do is they cave to the government interests. Now, when the Founding Fathers adopted the First Amendment, they didn't want any part of government suppressing speech and free press and free exchange of ideas. And for a long time in this country, there were a lot of very good lawyers who absolutely hated the idea of white supremacy and the Nazi Party, which was a thing in the United States. But they went to court and they defended the right of the Nazi Party to have their banners and have their marches so that that right would be preserved for all of us. They were associated with the American Civil Liberties Union. The American Civil Liberties Union has abandoned ship. They are not doing what they are supposed to do. And frankly, every person on the board of the American Civil Liberties Union ought to resign tomorrow, because they are failing in their mission. Censorship is never a good thing. And the day is coming when someone is going to make the argument that I just made. That is, that big tech is being manipulated, and it isn't big tech making rules on its own platform here that is at fault. It's the government acting through them as a cat's paw to regulate speech content. And when that argument gets made, I hope I have an opportunity to attend the Supreme Court argument when that happens, because I will be cheering on the people making it. Did this provoke your thoughts? What do you think about this? I'm truly curious. Leave me a note in the comments. Let me know how you feel about censorship. Look, I don't want people saying all kinds of crazy things. There are aliens at Area 51, and they're doing thought experiments, and people are being abducted every day by space aliens. The remedy for bad speech is not the suppression of that speech. It's more speech. It's speech by people who stand up and say, that's baloney. That's nonsense. And that's why I think it's very important for everybody to draft a letter to their congressmen and senators and say, don't let them get by with this censorship that they're attempting to do throughout the country by manipulating the big tech platforms. If you've enjoyed this, if it's provoked some thought in your mind about what censorship is and how it's done, I would greatly appreciate it if you would give me a thumbs up. And at the same time, if you haven't already, go over here and subscribe to our channel so that you can be notified whenever I do a video and release it here on YouTube. Finally, thank you for watching this video. I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope to produce additional content and more thought-provoking pieces in the future. Thanks again for watching. Have a terrific day.